Today, we're diving into the fundamentals of real estate, focusing specifically on the different forms of real estate ownership. Understanding these forms is crucial because they define how property can be held, shared, protected, and transferred. This gives us a clear picture of the legal and practical aspects involved in owning real estate. Over the next 26 slides, we'll explore these concepts in detail to help you grasp the essential knowledge needed in the world of real estate. When we talk about how property is owned, it's important to understand that the ownership structure shapes control, risk, tax implications, and what happens when ownership changes hands. Legally, ownership determines who has the authority to sell the property, who can inherit it, and who needs to give consent for any transactions. This can affect everything from day-to-day decisions to major transfers down the line. In terms of taxes, different ownership structures can change how deductions are handled, how capital gains are treated, and what kinds of transfer taxes may apply. These factors also play a big role in estate planning, influencing how property can be passed to heirs efficiently. Liability protection is another crucial consideration. Some ownership forms leave personal assets vulnerable, while others create a protective barrier, shielding owners from personal liability related to the property. All these points, legal, tax, and liability implications, highlight why understanding the fundamentals of real estate ownership structure is so important. It's not just about who owns the property, but how that ownership affects control, risk, and financial outcomes. When we talk about sole ownership in real estate, it means that one person holds full legal title to the property. This individual has complete control over all decisions related to property, including how it's used, sold, or financed. Since there are no co-owners, no consent is needed from anyone else to make these decisions. This setup gives the owner full control, but also means they bear all the responsibilities and obligations tied to the property. Importantly, personal exposure typically isn't separated from the ownership, so the owner faces direct liability for any issues or debts connected to property. This structure is straightforward, but carries significant personal risk. When we talk about sole ownership, it's important to understand both the advantages and disadvantages that come with it. Starting with the benefits. The biggest plus is full control. Since there's just one owner, that person gets to make every decision without needing to consult others, which can make things quicker and more straightforward. Plus, all the profits belong solely to that owner. There's no need to share income or the value appreciation with partners or shareholders. This also means the business structure tends to be simpler, with fewer legal and management layers to navigate. On the downside, sole ownership comes with unlimited liability. This means personal assets can be at risk if the business runs into financial trouble. All the responsibility for operations, risks, and maintenance falls on one individual, which can be quite demanding. Lastly, capital requirements can be a challenge because funding growth is limited to the owner's own resources. There's no pool of investors or partners to tap into. So while sole ownership is straightforward and grants full control, it also requires shouldering every risk and responsibility alone. On this slide, we're looking at the concept of equal ownership shares, specifically in the context of joint tenancy. Joint tenancy is a form of co-ownership where two or more people hold equal, undivided interests in the same property. This means each owner has an equal right to the whole property, not just a specific portion. One of the most important principles of joint tenancy is the right of survivorship. This means that if one owner passes away, their share automatically transfers to the remaining owner or owners. This transfer happens outside of the will or probate, making it a smooth and direct process. Understanding this key feature is crucial because it affects how property ownership is managed and passed on in the event of an owner's death. Here, we're looking at the concept of multi-owner property, specifically focusing on what's called tenancy in common. This is a form of ownership where two or more people have separate, fractional interests in the same piece of property. These shares can be equal or unequal, depending on the agreement or investment each owner has made. A key point to understand is that each owner holds an independent and transferable interest. This means they have the freedom to sell or transfer their share without needing approval from the other co-owners. Another important aspect is what happens when an owner passes away. Their share doesn't automatically go to the other owners. Instead, it passes to their heirs or according to their will. So, to sum it up, Tenancy in common offers flexibility in ownership shares and control over individual interests, making a common structure for shared real estate investments. Let's compare two common forms of co-ownership, joint tenancy and tenancy in common. Starting with ownership rights. Co-owners in a joint tenancy typically hold equal interest in the property, meaning everyone owns the same share. In contrast, tenancy in common allows owners to hold unequal shares, such as 50-50 or 70-30ths, providing more flexibility in ownership proportions. Next is survivorship. Joint tenancy includes the right of survivorship. So if one owner passes away, their share automatically transfers to the surviving owners. On the other hand, tenancy in common does not have this automatic transfer. Instead, a deceased owner's share passes according to their estate or will. When it comes to transferability, an owner in a joint tenancy can transfer their share, but this action usually breaks the joint tenancy. Meanwhile, tenants in common can independently sell or transfer their interests without disrupting co-ownership among the others. For management, joint tenants generally share equal possession and must agree on major decisions together. Tenants in common also have possession rights, but control and management typically follow the terms set out in their co-ownership agreement. The key distinction here is that joint tenancy is designed for automatic transfer of ownership after death, promoting seamless succession. Tenancy in common, by contrast, favors flexibility, allowing varied ownership shares and individualized control over property interests. In summary, both forms enable shared ownership, but they differ significantly in handling death, transfers, and management of the property. Understanding these differences is fundamental when choosing the right structure for real estate co-ownership. Here we're looking at a specific type of marital ownership called tenancy by the entirety. This form of ownership is unique because it treats the married couple as one single legal unit when it comes to owning property. Both spouses share equal ownership and, importantly, survivorship rights are built directly into the arrangement. What does this mean practically? First, it's only available to married couples and only in states that recognize this kind of ownership. One of the biggest advantages is that it can offer protection from creditors. If only one spouse has debts, creditors usually cannot claim the property owned this way. Another key point is survivorship. If one spouse passes away, the surviving spouse automatically becomes the sole owner of the entire property without the need for probate. This makes tenancy by the entirety a powerful option for married couples who want both legal protection and a seamless transfer of ownership after death. Now, let's talk about real estate ownership under the concept of community property. This means that property acquired during marriage is generally owned equally by both spouses. It doesn't matter who earned the income or whose name is on the title. Both spouses have an equal share. This principle is applied in specific U.S. states, including Arizona, California, Idaho, Louisiana, Nevada, New Mexico, Texas, Washington, and Wisconsin. Understanding which states follow community property laws is important because it affects how ownership and rights to property are determined in those regions. Here, we're looking at two main types of corporate ownership structures: C Corp, S Corp, and limited liability companies, or LLCs. Starting with C Corp and S Corp, these represent a formal structure where the company is owned by shareholders. One big advantage is liability protection. It separates your personal assets from any claims related to the property. However, taxation differs. C Corp might face double taxation because the company pays taxes and shareholders pay taxes on dividends, whereas S Corp allow income to pass through directly to shareholders, avoiding this. Management is also more formal, involving directors, officers, and established bylaws, which generally supports larger portfolios or situations with multiple investors or institutional ownership. On the other hand, LLCs offer a flexible ownership structure that's typically member-managed. Like corporations, LLC members usually avoid personal liability beyond their investment, protecting their personal assets. When it comes to taxes, LLCs usually benefit from pass-through taxation, but they also have the option to be taxed as a corporation if that makes sense for their situation. Their management style is customizable, with operating agreements that set voting rights and profit-sharing arrangements tailored to the members' preferences. This setup tends to work well for rental properties, smaller groups, or when you want to isolate assets more distinctly. In summary, both corporations and LLCs can hold real estate titles, but they vary significantly in taxation, governance, and the level of protection provided to owners. Choosing the right structure depends on your portfolio size, the complexity of ownership, and your tax considerations. Now, let's talk about real estate investment trusts, or REITs, which are a popular type of investment vehicle in real estate. Essentially, a REIT is a company that owns or finances income producing real estate. Instead of buying property directly, investors can buy shares in these companies. One of the main advantages is a focus on income. REITs often distribute earnings to shareholders through regular dividends, making them attractive for income-focused investors. Another key benefit is diversified exposure. REITs typically hold a variety of property types, including office buildings, apartments, retail spaces, healthcare facilities, and industrial assets. This diversification helps spread risk across different sectors. Additionally, REIT shares, especially those traded publicly, offer liquidity, meaning they can be bought and sold more easily compared to direct property investments. Overall, REITs provide a way for investors to access real estate markets passively, combining income potential, diversification, and liquidity without the challenges of managing physical properties themselves. When it comes to partnership structures in real estate, there are two main types to consider: general partnerships and limited partnerships. In a general partnership, all partners share control. Each partner can participate in managing the investment, but this comes with personal liability for any debts and obligations. It's a hands-on approach where everyone is actively involved and responsible. Limited partnerships, on the other hand, have tiered roles. General partners take on the management duties, making decisions and overseeing the investment. Limited partners mainly contribute capital and have more restricted involvement, with limited liability exposure. This structure can help balance active management with passive investment. Now, let's discuss some essential agreement terms that should be clearly defined to avoid conflicts. First are the rights, which include specifying ownership percentages, voting power, how the property is used, and rules for transferring or buying out partners. Next are responsibilities, clarifying who is responsible for funding expenses, maintaining the property, signing leases, and handling financing or tax reporting. Finally, there's dispute resolution. It's vital to establish how deadlocks or disagreements will be handled, whether through mediation, arbitration, forced sale conditions, or specific decision thresholds. Overall, shared ownership works best when the legal structure is transparent and all operating rules are documented up front. This helps prevent misunderstandings and keeps the partnership running smoothly. On this slide, we're focusing on public and mission-held property, which is a key part of real estate fundamentals. Unlike private properties aimed at generating profit, these properties are held to serve public purposes or support specific missions. First, government ownership involves public entities holding land, infrastructure, and housing to benefit the community. This means a property is used for things like parks, schools, or public housing, all intended to serve the public good rather than make money. Then, we have institutional ownership. This includes universities, hospitals, and nonprofits that own property to advance their missions. For example, a university might own buildings for research and education, while a hospital owns facilities to provide health care. The important takeaway is that these types of ownership prioritize community service and mission goals over financial returns, which makes them a distinct and essential part of real estate landscape. Here, we're looking at the ownership model for condominiums. Essentially, condominium ownership combines individual unit ownership with shared ownership of common areas. When you buy a condo, you get title to your specific unit, but areas like hallways, amenities, and grounds are collectively owned by all condo owners. In terms of structure, you have private ownership of the interior space of your unit, while you hold an undivided interest in the shared elements of the building and grounds. Governance is handled by a homeowners association or condo association, which establishes rules, collects dues, and maintains these common areas to ensure everything runs smoothly for all residents. This model balances personal property rights with shared responsibilities. Let's talk about residential cooperative buildings, often called co-ops. Unlike traditional homeownership, buyers in a co-op don't actually own their individual units directly. Instead, they purchase shares in a corporation that owns the entire building. These shares give them occupancy rights through what's called a proprietary lease tied to a specific apartment. One key aspect of co-ops is control. The co-op's board has significant authority over who can buy shares, how financing is handled, and who is allowed to live in the building. This board review process often means stricter rules compared to condominiums, but these rules can help maintain the building's stability and protect everyone's investment. So, owning in a co-op is less about holding a piece of real property and more about owning shares that grant you the right to live in a designated unit under the board's regulations. This model emphasizes collective ownership and control, which can create a tight-knit and well-managed community. Let's talk about the vacation property model, specifically focusing on timeshare and fractional ownership. These options allow you to buy scheduled use rights or a partial interest in a vacation property, rather than owning the entire property outright. This approach is popular because it offers several advantages. First, it's a great way to secure recurring annual stays in resort destinations, giving you the predictability of a vacation spot each year without the hassle of full ownership. Plus, it typically requires a lower upfront cost compared to buying a second home on your own. Another key benefit is access to luxury properties where maintenance and management are handled for you, so you get to enjoy the property without the usual upkeep worries. This makes timeshare and fractional ownership attractive options for many vacationers looking for convenience, cost savings, and shared luxury. Let's start with deductions. When it comes to rental properties, you can deduct building depreciation over time, which helps reduce your taxable income. However, it's important to note that land itself is not depreciable. Only the improvements made to property can be depreciated. Also, keep in mind that when you sell the property, you might face recapture tax, which essentially means paying back some of those tax benefits. Moving on to disposition, or what happens when you sell property. Capital gains come into play here. If we're talking about a primary residence, there are often gain exclusion limits available, which can help you avoid paying tax on some of the profit. But investment properties are a different story. Gains from those sales are generally taxable. One way to defer those gains, though, is through a 1031 exchange, which lets you swap qualifying real estate without paying immediate taxes on the profit. Regarding entity taxation, the structure of your ownership really matters. LLCs and partnerships usually pass income and losses directly through to the owners, so the business itself doesn't pay tax. Owners report on their returns. If you own property as a sole proprietor, it's reported directly on your personal tax return as well. But if your property is held in AC Corporation, profits and dividends may face double taxation, once at the corporate level and again at the individual level. Finally, the tax structure overall depends heavily on your ownership type. Different forms impact what deductions you can take, when gains are recognized, and whether income is taxed once or twice. So choosing the right structure is key to maximizing tax efficiency in real estate. When we talk about liability protection in relation to ownership structure, the key idea is that the way a property is held has a big impact on how much personal risk the owner faces. Generally, liability protection is strongest when the property is owned through a legal entity and weakest when the property is owned personally and directly. At the top of the list, we have ownership through an LLC or corporation. These are separate legal entities, which means they can shield your personal assets from claims related to property. This separation provides the strongest level of protection against liability. Next, we have limited partnerships. Here, limited partners enjoy significant protection because their liability is typically limited to their investment. However, general partners in these arrangements do not have the same level of protection and remain more exposed to risk. Joint or common ownership comes third. When multiple owners share property, risk is also shared. However, personal liability can still reach each owner directly, so the protection is moderate. Finally, sole ownership offers the weakest protection. In this case, there are very few legal barriers separating the property liabilities from the owner's personal assets. This means the risk is the highest because your personal finances are directly exposed. Understanding this hierarchy is critical when deciding how to hold property, especially if minimizing personal risk is a priority. When it comes to financing and mortgages, the type of ownership plays a crucial role. Lenders don't just evaluate the property itself, They also carefully assess the borrower. This evaluation influences the interest rates offered, the documentation needed, required guarantees, and how easily funding can be secured. For individual ownership, financing is typically similar to residential mortgages. Lenders focus on personal income, credit scores, debt to income ratios, and how the property will be used. It's often a more straightforward process for sole owners. In contrast, corporate ownership usually falls under commercial loan terms. Lenders place heavier emphasis on the company's operating history, cash flow stability, reserve funds, and thorough review of organizational documents. This means more scrutiny and sometimes stricter terms. Partnerships and LLCs bring additional complexity. Multi-owner structures require lenders to examine the ownership shares, the authority of individuals to borrow, and the financial soundness of each principal. This can make securing loans more challenging. Specifically for LLCs, while using a single-purpose LLC can protect liability, lenders often want personal guarantees from the members. They may also ask for larger down payments or require seasoning periods before allowing refinancing. This balance between liability protection and lender requirements is important to understand when structuring ownership and financing. When we talk about transferability, it's important to understand that some ownership interests in real estate can move easily from one person to another, while others require consent or legal steps. For example, with sole ownership or tenancy in common, transfer your interest is usually straightforward. You can sell or gift your share directly without much hassle. On the other hand, more complex ownership structures like partnerships, LLCs, co-ops, or timeshares often have rules that make transfer less simple. These might include reviewing operating agreements, getting board approvals, or ensuring the buyer meets certain qualifications. The type of title you hold also affect liquidity. Things like survivorship rights, lender conditions, and the specific rules governing the ownership entity can either speed up the transfer process or introduce delays and extra costs. So it's crucial to know the details. Moving on to estate planning, it's vital to plan for succession before a transfer becomes necessary due to death or incapacity. For instance, joint tenancy automatically passes ownership to the surviving owners, which can avoid probate. In contrast, tenants in common can designate heirs through a will or trust, but their shares might go through probate if not properly planned. Probate can be a lengthy and costly process, so strategies like beneficiary designations, survivorship rights, and trusts can help keep assets out of probate, simplifying matters for heirs. Trusts, particularly revocable ones, along with entity interests and coordinated deeds, play a key role in making administration easier during incapacity while maintaining control over property. Overall, the form of ownership you choose significantly impacts how easily interests can be sold, inherited, retitled, or protected from probate, and recognizing this relationship is fundamental to effective real estate management and planning. When choosing the right ownership structure for your business, it's important to align the structure with your overall strategy. This means carefully evaluating 4 key decision points in a specific order. First, consider control. Ask yourself who will be making the decisions and whether ownership can be shared equally or if it needs to be more centralized. Control determines how power is distributed within the business. Next, think about liability. You need to decide how much personal financial exposure you're willing to accept. Some structures offer protection from personal liability, while others may put your personal assets at risk. Third, focus on taxes. It's crucial to understand how income, losses, and deductions will flow through the business. The right structure can provide tax efficiency, so look at how the business's finances will be treated by tax authorities. Finally, look at transferability. Consider how easily ownership interests can be sold, inherited, or restructured. This affects your flexibility in the future if you want to bring in new partners or exit the business. By evaluating control, liability, taxes, and transferability in this order, you can choose the ownership structure that best fits your needs and long-term strategy. Here we have a case study involving a multi-family property, specifically a 24-unit apartment building. 4 investors come together to buy this property, with the goal of generating rental income right away, and then either refinancing or selling the property within 5 to 7 years. The key challenge they face is how to share the economic benefits without exposing themselves to shared personal liability. Since the situation involves multiple capital contributors and ongoing management decisions, structuring the ownership properly is crucial. This is where an LLC or limited liability company becomes the go-to solution. The LLC helps isolate each investor's risk, so no one is personally liable beyond their investment. Additionally, it clearly outlines voting rights, how profits are split, and terms for exiting the investment. Central to this arrangement is the operating agreement. This document serves as a blueprint for control, how distributions are handled, and how any disputes between investors are resolved. In situations like this, using an LLC streamlines ownership and protects the interests of all parties involved. When structuring commercial real estate deals, the choice of ownership entity is crucial. Most deals default to using an LLC because it offers the best combination of liability protection and operating flexibility. An LLC shields investors from personal liability while allowing for adaptable management structures, which is why it's the most common choice. Another common option is a partnership, which is particularly useful when you have active sponsors involved alongside passive capital investors. This structure facilitates sharing the economic benefits based on involvement, with clear distinctions between who manages the property and who provides the capital. Tenancy in common is another approach, allowing investors to hold fractional interests in the property. However, this can complicate financing and decision-making because each co-owner has a separate interest and rights, making it more challenging to coordinate actions. To put this into perspective, consider an $18 million downtown property owned by multiple investors with long-term tenants. In such a case, the sponsor acquiring this mixed-use office and retail asset needs to carefully balance the desire for control over the asset, provide enough flexibility for diverse investors, and ensure proper liability protection. This balance will ultimately influence which ownership structure is best suited to the investment scale and risk profile. When it comes to cross-border ownership, there's an added layer of complexity we need to understand. Buying property or assets abroad isn't just about finding a good deal. It also means navigating foreign ownership limits, tax outcomes influenced by treaties, and regulations that control moving money in and out of the country. First, restrictions are important. Some countries have rules that limit non-resident purchases, especially when it comes to land rights or owning property near sensitive areas like borders and coastlines. These rules are designed to protect local interests and national security. Next, tax treaties play a critical role. The taxes you may owe on income, capital gains, or estates are shaped not only by the local laws, but also by international treaties that can provide relief or set withholding requirements. Understanding these treaties can make a significant difference in your tax obligations. Capital controls are another major factor. These include restrictions on currency conversion, the ability to repatriate funds, and financing options, which often require banking approvals and are subject to transfer limits. These controls can affect the liquidity and flexibility of your investment. Ultimately, no matter what agreements or treaties exist, local law always governs the asset itself. So, it's essential to carefully study and comply with the legal framework of the country in which you're investing. This local control can have a final say in ownership rights and the management of the asset. Here are the key ownership structures in real estate. First, sole ownership offers maximum control since one person holds the entire property. It's straightforward but places all responsibility on the owner. Next, joint tenancy involves equal co-ownership, typically between spouses or close partners, and includes automatic survivorship, meaning the property passes directly to the surviving owner without probate. Then there's tenancy in common, which allows owners to hold different shares, making it versatile for partners or heirs to divide their interests as they see fit. For investment properties, LLCs and corporations provide stronger liability protection, separating personal assets from potential risks tied to the property. Finally, options like condos, co-ops, REITs, and fractional ownership give you shared access to real estate, often with lower upfront costs or opportunities for passive income. Understanding these structures is essential for making informed decisions in real estate ownership. As we reach the final step, it's crucial to consult a professional before making any decisions. The ownership choices you make will impact liability, taxes, financing, and even estate planning. Because these areas are complex and highly individualized, It's essential to get legal and tax advice that aligns with your specific goals. You'll want to work with an attorney who can help you with title issues, liability concerns, and transfer terms. A CPA or tax advisor will ensure you understand the tax implications and reporting requirements. And don't forget to involve a lender or financial planner to make sure your financing fits your long-term strategy. The best practice here is simple. Always ask questions before you sign anything. Taking just a short consultation can save you from costly mistakes down the road. This step is fundamental in navigating real estate successfully